everyone, I am Aliana-Dee Bahjin along with my group mates Christian J. Owera and Melvinnajar P. Adjad. We are going to review the book The Great Gatsby by Francis Scott Fitzgerald. The Great Gatsby, the third novel by Francis Scott Fitzgerald, published in 1925 by Charles Scribner's Sons. Set in Jazz Age New York, the novel tells the tragic story of J. Gatsby, a self-made millionaire, and his pursuit of Daisy Buchanan, a wealthy young woman whom he loved in his youth. Francis Scott Fitzgerald was a short story writer and novelist considered one of the preeminent authors in the history of American literature, due almost entirely to the enormous success of his third book, which is The Great Gatsby, perhaps the quintessential American novel as well as the definitive social history of the Jazz Age. The Great Gatsby has become required reading for virtually every American high school student and has had a transportive effect on generation after generation of the readers. At the age of 24, the success of his first novel, The Side of Paradise, made Fitzgerald famous. 1 week later, he married the woman he loved and his muse, Zelda Sire. However, by the end of 1920s, Fitzgerald descended into drinking, and Zelda had a mental breakdown. Following the unsuccessful Tender is the Night, Fitzgerald moved to Hollywood and became a scriptwriter. He died there of a heart attack in 1940 at the age of 44. His final novel only half completed. The novel is set in the fictional town of West Egg on Long Island in the early 1920s. Indeed, Fitzgerald was inspired to write the book by the grand parties he attended on prosperous Long Island, where he got a front-row view of the elite, money-eyed class of the 1920s, a culture he longed to join but never could. Nick Carraway, a young man from Minnesota, moves to New York in the summer of 1922 to learn about the bond business. He rents a house in the West Egg district of Long Island, a wealthy but unfashionable area populated by the new rich, a group of have made their fortunes too recently to have established social connections and who are prone to garish displays of wealth. Nick's next-door neighbor in West Egg is a mysterious man named J. Gatsby, who lives in a gigantic Gothic mansion and throws extravagant parties every Saturday night. Nick is unlike the other inhabitants of West Egg. He was educated at Yale and has social connections in East Egg, a fashionable area of Long Island home to the established upper class. Nick drives out to the East Egg one evening for dinner with his cousin Daisy Buchanan and her husband Tom, which is a classmate of Nick at Yale. Daisy and Tom introduce Nick to Jordan Baker, a beautiful, cynical young woman with whom Nick begins a romantic relationship with. Nick also learns a bit about Daisy and Tom's marriage. Jordan tells him that Tom has a lover, Myrtle Wilson, who lives in the Valley of Ashes, a gray of industrial dumping ground between West Egg and New York City. After this revelation, Nick travels to New York City with Tom and Myrtle at a vulgar Gaudi party in the apartment that Tom keeps for the affair. Myrtle begins to taunt Tom about Daisy and Tom responds by breaking her nose. As the summer progresses, Nick eventually garners an invitation to one of Gatsby's legendary parties. He encounters Jordan Baker at the party and they meet Gatsby himself, a surprisingly young man who affects an English accent, has a remarkable smile, and calls everyone old sport. Gatsby asks to speak to Jordan alone, and through Jordan, Nick later learns more about his mysterious neighbor. Gatsby tells Jordan that he knew Daisy in Louisville in 1917 and is deeply in love with her. He spends many nights staring at the green lights at the end of her dock across the bay from his mansion. Gatsby's extravagant lifestyle and wild parties are simply an attempt to impress Daisy. Gatsby now wants Nick to arrange a reunion between himself and Daisy, but he is afraid that Daisy will refuse to see him if she knows that he still loves him. Nick invites Daisy to have a tea party at his house without telling her that Gatsby will also be there. After an initially awkward reunion, Gatsby and Daisy re-establish their connection. Their love rekindled, they begin an affair. After a short time, Tom grows increasingly suspicious of his wife's relationship with Gatsby. At a lunch at Buchanan's house, Gatsby stares at Daisy with such a undisguised passion that Tom realizes Gatsby is in love with her. Though Tom is himself involved in an extramarital affair, he is deeply outraged by the thought that his wife could be unfaithful to him. He forces the group to drive into New York City, when Nick, Jordan, and Tom drive through the Valley of Ashes, however, they discover that Gatsby's car has struck and killed Myrtle, Tom's lover. They rush back to Long Island where Nick learns from Gatsby that Daisy was driving the car when it struck Myrtle, but that Gatsby intends to take the blame. The next day, Tom tells Myrtle's husband, George, that Gatsby was the driver of the car. George, who has leaped to the conclusion that the driver of the car that killed Myrtle must have been her lover. He finds Gatsby in the pool at his mansion and shoots him dead. He then fatally shoots himself. Nick stages a small funeral for Gatsby, ends his relationship with Jordan, and moves back to Midwest to escape the disgust he feels for the people surrounding Gatsby's life and for the emptiness and moral decay of life among the wealthy on the East Coast. Nick reflects that just as Gatsby's dream of Daisy was corrupted by money and dishonesty, the American dream of happiness and individualism has disintegrated into the mere pursuit of wealth. Though Gatsby's power to transform his dream into reality is what makes him great, Nick reflects that the era of dreaming, both Gatsby's dream and the American dream, is over.
Great Gatsby. J. Gatsby struggled to rekindle a friendship with Daisy when her heart is the main conflict in the Fitzgerald's classic book. The Great Gatsby, the protagonist of the story is Gatsby and the antagonist is Tom Bahjin, who is married to Daisy and depicted as an arrogant, aggressive character. The fight between Gatsby and Tom for Daisy's heart is considered a man versus man. As prosperous bootlegger, J. Gatsby ends up amusing his money in a criminal underworld, totally fabricated the identity of wealthy aristocrat and buys a house in the West Egg, which is from Bahjin States, directly across the bay. Gatsby is briefly willing to have an affair with Daisy before her husband figures out she's cheating on him. Tom Bahjin continues to investigate and learn that J. Gatsby is a bootlegger who works for a shady Mayor Wolfsheim. In the lives of individuals, motivation is a major factor, particularly in the lives of the characters. In the novel of The Great Gatsby, money in the relationship between characters is a big motivator and it contributes to bad results. Most of the characters reveal themselves to be very greedy and their motivations are motivated by their desires for money and expensive things. Daisy marries and stays with Tom because of the feelings of security he gives her, his high class and wealth. Even before he learned that Daisy weeps over Gatsby's stunning shirts, Tom Bahjin takes an instant to hate Gatsby. His investigation complicates matter. J. Gatsby really turned out to be James Gats, a poor kid who gained all his money from organized crime, gambling, bootlegging, liquor. No wonder there's so much trouble with Gatsby fitting in. And for my own opinion, this novel is very interesting because of the style how Fitzgerald wrote this novel. Even though some of his points are very hard to understand, but somehow it signifies during the age of jazz, in which the novel describes about criticism and wealth.
So hi everyone, so today I'm going to share to you my insights on what can be predicted about the outcome of the Great Gatsby. So I will give my two predictions. So first, based on the story of Gatsby and Daisy and what happened before she married Tom Bahjin, we might predict that Daisy won't ever actually leave Tom. Although Daisy was momentarily willing to back out of her wedding to wait for Gatsby, telling Jordan to give the pearls back and to tell the crowd that she'd changed her mind. After a bath and a little time to sober up, the pearls were around her neck and the incident was over. The letter she'd evidently received from Gatsby made her second guess her decision, and she held on to that letter until it disintegrated in the bath. Then the next day, she married Tom without so much as a shiver, and she left for her honeymoon as though nothing had happened. The memory of her love for Gatsby was enough to make her sad, but she ultimately decided to do the practical thing, the thing everyone would expect her to do. We might surmise then that's Gatsby influence in Daisy's life might amount to little more than a crumpled reminder of the past, while she goes on to choose Tom again because he is choice society would expect her to make. So this is my second prediction. So based on Nick's introduction to the chapter next is my second prediction. So based on Nick's introduction to the story in chapter 1 and the development of the characters so far, certain predictions would seem logical. Daisy and Gatsby will meet again and resume their relationship. Gatsby has spent the last 5 years dreaming of this, and Daisy had missed Gatsby terribly when he left for the war. She had wanted to go to New York to see Gatsby before he went overseas. She got drunk before her wedding and Tom and cried. A letter from Gatsby in her hands. Also, Tom and Daisy marriage has never been a strong and loving one. Tom's infidelities show this. Tom won't take Daisy and Gatsby relationship well. Tom is very arrogant and possessive. He is used to having his way. He won't give up Daisy easily. She is one of his possessions. Gatsby's dreams will not turn out well. Whatever happens based on what is known in the first 4 chapters will be serious enough that it makes Nick go back home where he continues to think about Gatsby long after the summer of 1922. Gatsby will somehow be hurt or even destroyed by getting involved with Tom and Daisy. Nick says in chapter 1 that something preyed on Gatsby and that thus floated in the wake of his trip. So for the last part, I will be giving my conclusion. So The Great Gatsby is in many ways similar to Romeo and Juliet, yet it is so much more than a love story. There are many novels which claim that they are the greatest love story of all time. It is only in the case of this novel that statement can be applied and be true. The novel is set during the Roaring 20s in America, narrated by Nick Carraway, a man from a well-to-do family just out of fighting the war and looking to sell bonds. He moves to East Egg, the slightly less grand area in comparison to West Egg, right opposite Gatsby's mansion. Gatsby is rich, mega rich, and throws magnificent parties every weekend which the whole town attend. However, the host is never seen during these parties and is never completely known by any one person. Gatsby holds a dark secret about his past and how he became so great, a deep loss that will eventually lead to his demise. Next, then, The Great Gatsby is in many ways similar to Romeo and Juliet, yet I believe that it is so much more than just a love story. It is also a reflection on the hollowness of a life of leisure. Both stories are obsessed with controlling time. Juliet wants to extend her present as her future prospects with Romeo are bleak, and Gatsby wants to create a beautiful future by restoring the past. This is what leads Gatsby to say his most famous line, "Can change the past? Why, of course you can." I could very much relate to this. There have been many moments where I wish that I could go back to the past and just remain there, for it was a better place. Similarly to Romeo and Juliet, Fitzgerald's writing is almost like a word of poetry, with waves of literary brilliance, creating a rich and lush rhythm which you can almost tap your foot to. The descriptions are jarringly, magnificently beautiful, a rich and lush rhythm which you can almost tap your foot to. The descriptions are jarringly, magnificently beautiful so that it almost made my heart ache. However, unlike in Romeo and Juliet, the characters in The Great Gatsby are in themselves very flawed and very hard to sympathize with. But that is the beauty of the book. Of course, you hate Daisy Buchanan. Of course, you hate Tom. You even begin to dislike Gatsby, to whom it is not enough for Daisy to say that she loved him, but requires her to state that she never in her 5-year marriage loved her husband Tom. But Gatsby to me remains great, and right until end of this book. So it is ironic that only the idle rich survive this novel, and Fitzgerald through this further enrages the reader about the cruelty and the injustice of the world. The rich are allowed to continue to be careless, for that is the dream. Is it not? To live a carefree life? Yet Fitzgerald highlights the horrors of being a careless person. They smash up things and creatures and then retreated back into their money and vast carelessness. What's amazing in this line is that Tom and Daisy aren't careless to be malicious. That is just their nature, and that in itself is a very sad thing. They do not care for their daughter, for Myrtle, for Gatsby, nor even each other. Their inability to care is what makes The Great Gatsby the stark opposite to Romeo and Juliet, wherein the lovers are sacrificed and Verona is healed. In Fitzgerald's masterpiece, nothing is made whole by this tragedy. Many consider The Great Gatsby to be depressing, because in the end, those who dream do not achieve their aspirations. However, the main message that Fitzgerald sends to us isn't that dreaming will lead to despair, but chasing an unworthy dream will lead to tragedy. So that's all. Thank you guys for viewing and listening. Have a great day.
That's it, guys. Thank you for listening, and if you have more questions about The Great Gatsby, just drop it down below in the comment section. Thank you!